Fear Street Part 1, 1994, is a slasher movie on Netflix. It is a whole trilogy that I wanted to check out. My friend told me it was really good. He loves slasher movies. But 1994 is actually a really solid slasher movie. It starts off with a mall massacre. And we find out a little bit more about the residents of Shadyside. They live in this crappy part of town where, people go crazy and commit acts of atrocious violence all the time. Every couple of years, there's an incident. Meanwhile, the people in Sunnyvale, they live across from them and they have a big rivalry. But our main character is Dina. She is a character who's heartbroken over her love interest. And after a candlelight vigil, they get into a rivalry attack and cause a car accident. And they find a witch's grave, which has some grave consequences for them all when a masked killer shows up and tries to kill Dina's love interest. So there's a lot of things to like about this movie. It's got really great kills. It's rated R. It's got some updated stuff. Even though it takes place in the 90s, it has some nice modern touches, such as the romance and the witch's curse angle. Because if you think about it, a lot of the classic slasher movies do have supernatural elements, even if you don't think they do. Like the later Friday the 13th films have like people with psychic powers and like Jason becoming a zombie, supernatural. Michael Myers is like the Shape, so he's invincible because he's pure evil. And of course Freddy, he's the dream demon, so like has the fantastical ability to go into people's dreams and hurt them. So this movie is no different. It has a witch's curse from their history. So the movie does a really great job of building up the mythology of all these different killers and the origin. And it introduces a fun cast of characters to sort of uncover it. So I'm guessing the director obviously pitched this as a sort of Stranger Things meets Goonies meets Friday the 13th, which is a nice mix. It's very suspenseful. It's really fun. There's a couple of weird things that aren't explained. For example, the main character's brother is black, but they don't explain why. Like, is he adopted? They don't show the mom or the dad, which is, fine, but I'm guessing she lost her mom somehow, and then it caused stuff like that is sort of pushed under the table in terms of like the main storyline, which is okay. But overall, Fear Street is a pretty solid slasher movie. It definitely had me on the edge of my seat, and definitely leaves things off for a sequel, obviously, because there's a trilogy. So I really enjoyed Fear Street Part 1, and I give it a 7.5 out of 10. Fear Street Part 2, 1978, is the sequel. It's part 2 of a trilogy, so it immediately starts where the last one takes off. We finally introduce a new character, and then we get a large extended flashback of what happened at Camp Nightwing, which is homage to, obviously, Camp Crystal Lake. I didn't quite enjoy this part of the trilogy because there's a lot of glaring elements that change it. For one thing, they make the kids at Camp Nightwing too young. So when the deranged killer snaps and starts killing everyone, it's all done off screen to be more tasteful, because it's not cool to show like a 10-year-old kid getting butchered with an axe, or like multiple children being killed with, anything. Like the same with Star Wars Episode 3, Anakin kills the younglings off screen. So that was a mistake right there. So it doesn't feel like a slasher movie right there, because a lot of the kills are off screen. But whenever the counselors are there and they get killed, get killed on full force. So it almost feels like the movie's trying to hold back and be, not too over the top, but they should have aged up all of the children in Camp Nightwing, the teenagers instead. And there's a lot of characters in there, and some of them are bulletproof though, because we've seen their adult forms in the modern day. So it's less suspenseful knowing that certain characters will survive. And the killer shows up and he doesn't really have much of a theme or anything. He's just sort of there. He doesn't get his cool mask until like almost halfway over the movie. And there's some suspenseful stuff going on with the world building. They're still trying to work with the mythology of the witch and like certain rules and aspects. But overall, we just get the one killer, and then they throw in a few more at the end. But overall, it's a kind of an underwhelming entry in the series, because they don't really have, they still have the character development, but overall it just feels like a really long extended flashback that's not as suspenseful, because half the kills are done off screen. Some characters can't be killed because we've seen their adult versions, and at the end of the day, it's kind of just like a carbon copy of Friday the 13th, but not as suspenseful. So yeah, it definitely feels like this entry is a little bit underwhelming, because it can't be a full slasher movie in its own right, because it feels like a flashback. It is a flashback section of a second movie, and then it leads off to the third one, which I'll watch next. So I give Fear Street Part 2 a 6 out of 10. Fear Street Part 3, 1666, is the third and final part of the Fear Street trilogy by Lee Janiak. This story takes place in 1666. Dina is now sort of inhabiting the body of Sarah Fear, as being given the sort of storyline, the true storyline of what happened back in the day. So the movie takes an odd casting choice, but having all the different characters being played by people we've seen before, so it can be a little confusing. But Sarah Fear's tragic story sort of mimics the modern day story now, and essentially we do get a small flashback, so we get this creepy sort of story, the first ever killer and the curse, and then of course the plot twist that sort of jumps us back to 1994, which I liked. They didn't really do that in the last movie. The last movie took mostly in 1978, and it wasn't that interesting. It was mostly a character development, half-assed slasher movie. So at least this one has a little bit more in terms of like a finale, because once we jump back to 1994, we get that the more fun we had in the first installment, having the showdown with all the killers, which is something I really was looking forward to, because in the second movie we only got to saw like the milkman and the little boy killer for like 5 seconds. So this one brings back all of them, so we get a little bit of everything, plus the ones we haven't seen, and plus the ones we have. And the stakes are higher than ever. It's still super gory, more fun. 1994 was my favorite installment, so this one, you know, kind of bookends the entire storyline with some flashbacks in between. But overall, it builds up a nice mythology. There was only one complaint I had, that there was a certain part in the 1666 flashback where they should have swapped Dina's actress for the Sarah Fear actress to sort of, you know, showcase the tragedy more, but they never did that, so it was kind of weird. But overall, it was a pretty strong entry. I really enjoyed it. It had lots of gore, action, kills, satisfying finale, and even opens it up for a sequel. So Fear Street 1666, I give it a 7 out of 10.